Welcome back to Cultivating Resilience. Stress is a normal part of life, but learning how to manage it can make all the difference in our well-being and how we are in our community. Today we're diving into the science of stress, how we can turn it from an obstacle into an opportunity for growth. Welcome, Amy. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Tell me a little bit about what stress might look like in a community.
Sure. Well, stress is when we are feeling like we have too much either going on, doing, maybe we're facing a traumatic event, maybe we're feeling unsafe in some capacity, whether it's like physically unsafe, whether it's emotionally unsafe, maybe the unpredictability of life, that can cause a lot of stress. And obviously when we have that without having any alleviation of that, that can be called basically toxic stress, which means that when we're facing a lot of stress, our brain sends a hormone through our body called cortisol, which basically allows us to protect itself. And so that's when we get into our fight, flight, freeze response. So that's when we're facing a lot of conflict. Maybe we're sort of running from the situation or trying to escape it, or freezing, which means we're just sort of disconnected or not doing anything. And those are kind of what happens when people feel very overly stressed.
What are the things in communities that could cause stress? When you think about your own communities, what are the things that create some of that stress?
I mean, I think it can be a multitude of things, and what the truth is that every person experiences stress in a different way. And so it could be things like financial stress, it could be maybe loss of jobs, it could be relationships that aren't feeling good. In our communities, it could be different political events that are happening. It could be, you think about the derecho, that was a community stress that we all experienced at once. And so it could be a multitude of different things in communities that could cause stress for lots of different people in different ways.
Yeah, and I'm guessing communities have, pockets of people that know each other relatively well, or kids that are playing with each other, and I think even of like, what a healthy community might be is people out and about, socializing, connected, but if we're isolated, or it's a impoverished community, or a community that has a lot of violence, that erodes our brain and our system. Tell me a little bit about that.
Sure. I mean, I think when people are experiencing a lot of those different things, people handle it in different ways. You're going back to the fight, flight, freeze things, but I also think that often that leads to people isolating themselves or feeling disconnected, or maybe it's they're in conflict with each other, or maybe they are blaming other people or lashing out. I think for a lot of people it means that they are just kind of stuck, like they don't know how to solve the problem or they don't know how to fix it. And again, I think that leads to isolation and disconnection amongst a group.
Yeah, I see this sometimes. There's some community like social media forums, and they'll say, anyone see this guy? He's been going door to door, and I can imagine the stress comes up in a community when someone reads that and then everyone's messaging back. So what are some of like the healthy ways we can manage stress, and what are some unhealthy ways that make me either feel more safe in my community or less safe?
I think the first thing is just knowing oneself, right? How do I know when I am experiencing maybe too much stress and I am not handling it very well? And so being able to have an awareness of your sort of own body situation. Am I just overthinking this? Is it just replaying in my head? Am I getting irritated with other people very easily or impatient? Am I isolating myself and not talking to anyone? Knowing oneself and how you respond to stress is important. And so in terms of like coping skills, I think it's those day-to-day things that are super important, right? Sleeping well, eating well, getting sunshine and warm weather, and being outside in nature, exercise, movement in your body, all those things are super healthy ways of handling stress. I would say unhealthy ways are all the things we just talked about, right? Maybe like isolating yourself, lashing out or blaming other people, maybe feeding into some of the drama or causing more anxiety for other people, I think are all maybe problematic ways. And then other people obviously have things that they turn to, substances or other factors like that might be unhealthy ways of handling stress.
One of the things you mentioned was derecho, and I thought, some of the ways in which a community managed stress post derecho was like helping each other out, showing up for one another, asking people, what do you need? You know, you see people raking other people's yards or helping with the kids while the adults go do things. I'm guessing some of those healthy coping mechanisms is leaning into those positive connections, giving back, helping one another, versus maybe some of the unhealthy things, which is like talking negative about neighbors or people in your community, or saying, oh, you know that boy on the corner, he's up to no good, you know? And so there are ways that we can narrate things and show up in our communities that help us feel more safe or more unsafe, I'm guessing.
Absolutely. I mean, I think relationships is a really key part of resiliency and stress management. And so helping one another, feeling positively about the things that you're doing in your community to support your community, whether it's your school community or actual physical community, and then cultivating those deep relationships. And I think you're exactly right. During the derecho, you saw that. We were in the midst of COVID, and you saw people out in their yards picking up tree limbs and raking and helping each other when we hadn't been very connected, truthfully, as a society. And I think that all helped us together kind of move through that when it was an extremely stressful time in our life.
Yeah, one of the things that it reminds me of that you kind of highlight is this essence of cultivating resilience in the midst of stress. And so if we even use the derecho example, it seemed like there are a lot of things people either knowingly or unknowingly were cultivating their resilience by the things they were doing. What did that look like? What are things we do that help cultivate that resilience in the midst of stress?
I think, again, going back to relationships, I think holding on to those key relationships and making new relationships with people. I think when we are all experiencing a stress together as a community, I think it can go one of two ways. It can either go sort of poorly and everybody's just getting upset with each other and blaming other people and raising the anxiety around that, or we can all kind of bond together and validate each other's feelings and validate each other's emotions and say, here, I'm here with you. We are all in this together as a community. And I think that is just such an enormous part of all of our individual resiliency, but also our resiliency as a community, to say we're all in this together and we're all going to figure this out and problem solve together.
Yeah, it was almost like this piece that people were helping each other feel safe. You don't have food, you know, you had these pop-up places that offered free food to people. You know, connection and belonging really seemed to be highlighted. It felt like meaning and purpose, that people were saying, I actually feel more resilient despite how stressful this COVID and derecho is, because I'm giving back. I feel a part of something bigger than myself. I feel like I'm being helpful. I feel like I'm able to utilize my strengths maybe to help a neighbor out. How do these things help us feel more resilient, even though what we're experiencing is incredibly stressful?
All of those things that you just mentioned all influence the individual human person. To say, like, I'm worth time and energy. People see me for who I am. They see the work and the help and support that I'm providing, but I can then also give on to others and do those other things to help. We know that relationships is probably one of the number one factors of resiliency for individual people and obviously for a community as well. And so I think you're right. When we saw that during the derecho piece, it was just actually quite beautiful to see that people coming together and all being in this together and all helping out one another and connecting at a time when we weren't feeling very connected. And I think when things aren't going well and people are feeling stressed, a huge part of that is that lack of connection and that lack of support to one another, and instead kind of the irritation and irritability and frustration with each other. And so I think it's just super important that people help and support and stand up for their community and the groups that they're involved in, and both give and get from those groups. That can really cultivate those relationships.
Yeah, it really reminds me of, like, how do we do community potlucks or get-togethers? How are we doing food drives maybe? Or I've seen a group of kids together doing lemonade stands and then donating that back to a church, or, you know, do we have a book club going? Like, the way that our community offers that connection, that engagement, those opportunities to mitigate stress really seem to matter. Stress is a part of life, but how we handle it shapes our overall well-being. Let's keep building resilience and finding balance one day at a time.